My 315-pound fiancé told me to lose 28 pounds before the wedding. I asked if he'd diet too. He laughed and said grooms don't have to. I took off my ring and set it down. I once believed love meant accepting someone exactly as they are. But then, just months before my wedding, the man I was going to marry looked me in the eye and demanded I lose 28 pounds for the photos. My entire world collapsed. It all started 5 years ago at a work conference. Mason was there, and his confidence, his humor. He had me laughing until my stomach hurt. He was a big guy, but I honestly didn't care. To me, how someone treated you mattered so much more than their body. When we started dating, I was 145 pounds, a size 6. Mason constantly praised my beauty, almost as if he couldn't quite believe I'd want him. 3 years flew by, and then came the engagement. He proposed at the restaurant where we had our first date, dropping to one knee, tears in his eyes, promising to make me happy forever. I said yes. I loved him, and I truly thought he loved me just as I was. Wedding planning kicked off almost immediately. And let me tell you, Mason had all the opinions. He wanted a specific venue, a certain caterer, a particular band. Navy and gold were his chosen colors. He even had a list of guests I'd never heard of. I mostly let him take the reins. He was so eager, and I just wanted him to have his dream wedding, you know? Then we hired the photographer. Mason spent 5 intense hours researching packages online. He studied sample wedding albums like they were final exams, creating spreadsheets to compare pricing, styles, editing choices. I thought it was sweet, actually, that he wanted to capture our special day perfectly. But then, after we'd paid the deposit, he called me to the kitchen table. He said he needed to discuss something really important. He started talking about how we'd look in the pictures, how he wanted our wedding album to be something we'd always be proud of. I agreed, of course. I wanted that too. And that's when he hit me with it. Mason suggested I lose weight. He said the camera adds 10 pounds, and he didn't want me to look overweight in our photos. 28 pounds, he recommended. The wedding was 9 months away, he pointed out, so I had plenty of time to start right away. He even claimed he'd already researched diets and gym memberships for me. I just sat there, my mind reeling, trying to process what I'd just heard. I asked him to repeat himself. He did, perfectly calmly, as if it was the most reasonable request in the world. He just wanted me to look good, he said. He said losing weight would help me glow on my wedding day, like brides should. He insisted it was because he loved me and wanted the best for us. My voice was tight when I finally asked him, "Are you going to lose weight?" He actually chuckled. He laughed like I'd just told a really bad joke. "That's different," he said. He thought grooms didn't have to worry about photos like brides did. He said everyone would be looking at me anyway, so I should try. He believed tuxedos flattered all body shapes, so he would look good. I looked at him, sitting across from me, a man who weighed 315 pounds, while I was 145. "Mason," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "By any measure, I am not the one who needs to lose weight in this relationship." He got defensive immediately. He said I was missing the point. It wasn't about health, he insisted. It was aesthetic. Brides should look a certain way, and I wasn't that. Then he dropped the bomb. His mother agreed. My blood ran cold. His mother? He said they'd discussed it 10 days ago, while looking at my old pictures. He said she'd noticed I'd gained a few pounds since we started dating and thought the wedding would be good motivation for me to get back in shape. I hadn't gained weight. Not an ounce. I still weighed the same as when we met. I ran 4 miles every morning. I practiced yoga 3 times a week. Nothing about my body had changed, but Mason and his mother's perception had. I didn't shout. No tears fell. I just stared at this man I had committed to marry, and in that moment, I realized I didn't know him at all. I asked him one more question. "Would you marry me if I didn't lose weight?" He paused. Just that hesitation, that split second of silence, told me everything I needed to know. He finally stammered that he would marry me, but maybe he'd be disappointed. He wanted to be proud of his bride, he said, and hoped I wouldn't be selfish. Slowly, deliberately, I took my engagement ring off my finger and placed it on the kitchen table between us. Mason stared at it, confusion clouding his face. "What are you doing?" he asked. "I'm losing weight," I told him. He looked bewildered. "How much?" he asked. 195 pounds, I said. It took him a few seconds, but then he realized I was talking about him. He looked down at that ring like he was seeing it for the first time, the diamond catching the kitchen light, and scattering tiny rainbows across the table. I watched his face shift from uncertainty to a dawning panic as my words finally sank in. He opened his mouth twice before speaking, and when he did, his voice was tight, biting, almost half an octave higher than usual. "Are you serious?" he whispered. "Right now?" "I have never been more serious about anything on earth," I told him. "I need you to leave our apartment tonight, so I can think straight without you trying to get me to lose 28 pounds. He leaned back so hard his chair scraped loudly against the floor. He claimed his name was on the lease too. This was his home, he said, and he wasn't leaving. I stood up, grabbed my handbag from the counter, the microwave bowl holding my keys as usual. They felt heavy in my hand. Mason called after me, asking where I was going, but I ignored him. I opened the door, walked down the hallway, and got into my car. The drive to Brooks' place took 25 minutes, but it felt like hours. Every traffic light seemed endless. My hands shook on the steering wheel. "The camera adds 10 pounds, I kept repeating to myself, and he wants to be proud of his bride. The lyrics stuck in my head like a terrible song. I pulled into Brooks' parking lot around 9 p.m. and just sat in my car for a minute, paralyzed. I decided to take the stairs instead of the elevator, needing the physical exertion, climbing up to her fourth-floor flat. She opened the door in pajamas and an old college sweater. One look at my face, and she stepped aside without saying a word. She pulled me inside and shut the door. Her apartment smelled like the vanilla farmer's market candles she always bought. She led me to the couch and vanished into the kitchen. I heard the kettle filling, the stove igniting. A few minutes later, she returned with 2 mugs and a box of tea bags and sat down next to me. Once I started talking, I couldn't stop. I poured out everything. Mason's comments, the photos, his mother's appalling support. I told her about his hesitation when I asked if he'd still marry me. I told her about taking off the ring. Brooke didn't interrupt once. She just listened, refilling my tea mug whenever it got low. The next morning, my neck was stiff from sleeping on Brooke's couch. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. The screen showed 21 missed calls from Mason. I scrolled through a dozen texts, swinging wildly from apology to accusation. One said I was overreacting to a simple request. Another claimed he was just boosting my performance. A third stated his mother only wanted our best. I put my fists to my eyes, then laid the phone face down. Brooke emerged from her bedroom in her jammies, asking if I wanted coffee. I don't even drink coffee, but I agreed. She handed me a cup with "nevertheless" printed in white French letters. I held the warm mug and watched my phone as if it might explode. 4 more texts from Mason popped up. The first said we needed to talk like adults. The second called me childish. The third claimed his mother was upset. I put my phone away and focused on the coffee. Over scrambled eggs and toast at Brooke's kitchen table, she asked what I was going to do. I had no idea. She grabbed a pen from a junk drawer and a napkin and started making a list. "Bank account first," she wrote. "Then landlord. Then lawyer." And she double underlined the last one. "Assess your needs." She urged me to open a separate bank account before Mason could do anything with our money. She suggested talking to the landlord about the lease. And most importantly, she told me to decide what I wanted before Mason's inevitable explanations and apologies could wear me down. As I looked at her list, I felt my chest expand. It hit me that I had completely shrunk myself to please Mason and his mother. I had let him pick the venue, the caterer, the band, the colors. I had laughed at his bad jokes. I had agreed to things I didn't want, swayed by his conviction. "I'm done shrinking," I told Brooke. She squeezed my hand across the table. I went back to the apartment at 11:30 a.m., knowing Mason would be at work. Even though his car wasn't in the parking lot, my hands shook as I turned the key. The unit looked exactly as we'd left it. Dinner dishes in the sink. My engagement ring still on the kitchen table. I picked up the ring. The sunlight streaming through the window made the diamond look tiny. How had I ever found it beautiful? I pulled 3 suitcases out of the bedroom closet. First, I packed clothes, enough for 9 or 10 days. Then my laptop, my running shoes, the family photos from my bedside table, my yoga mat, my favorite coffee mug from the kitchen cabinet, my stack of bedtime books, and my college journal. I looked around the apartment again and realized how little of it was actually mine. Mason's old furniture. His mother had picked the wall art. Only 3 suitcases held my entire life. I ignored the ring on the table as I zipped the last bag and left. As I was filling the second bag in my car, Mason's car pulled into the parking lot. He parked next to me and got out before I could close the trunk. "I'm just getting some things," I said when he asked. He suggested we have an adult discussion. I told him we could talk after I'd had time to process his request. He came closer, saying I was being unreasonable. He said he'd thought about it all night and realized he might have said things wrong, but his point was good. Brides should look their best, he insisted, and he promised to help me succeed. I looked him in the eye. I never wanted to lose 28 pounds. I repeated that I just needed space to think. He blamed thinking. He said I was overthinking a simple conversation and making it theatrical. An explanation would help me understand his love, he said. I got in my car and closed the trunk. Mason spoke through my locked parking lot window. I couldn't hear his words, but I saw his mouth moving, his face red. I started the car and drove away, leaving him standing there. My sister, Harper, called that afternoon, and I told her everything. She was quiet after I spoke, then promised to be at Brooke's apartment in 3.5 hours. I told her not to, but she insisted. Her extended cab pickup arrived exactly on time. Her hug was so tight I could barely breathe. Then she asked if I still had the apartment key, which I did. "Great," she said, "because we're going to get the rest of your stuff." Mason's car was gone again when we took Harper's truck back to the apartment. Harper didn't probe or ask. She just started packing boxes. She scooped my winter clothes, my kitchen supplies from the cabinets, my desk, my bookshelves, even my 4-year-old yard sale lamp. She whispered things under her breath about men who think women exist to look nice in photos. "The nerve," she fumed. "His mother and his 315 pounds can all go to hell." Because of her outrage, I felt less weird about leaving. I realized I wasn't overreacting. Wednesday morning, I waited at a busy bank. The woman behind the counter asked how she could help, and I said I needed to open a new account. She requested my information, her fingers flying over the computer forms. She didn't ask why I was opening a new account or where the money came from. She handled the paperwork with easy professionalism. I ended up with 55% of our savings in my new account. The number on the screen was smaller than I wanted, but much larger than I had feared. Signing the documents felt scary, but undeniably right. The agent handed me my temporary checks and debit card. I left the bank feeling a quiet accomplishment. That feeling, I realized, was independence. Mason dropped by Brooke's apartment Wednesday night without warning. He knocked while I was eating leftover Chinese on her couch. Brooke called my name through the peephole. I shook my head, and she nodded. She opened the chain-locked door. Mason demanded a private conversation. Brooke told him I'd call him when I was ready and that he needed to respect my space. Mason's voice grew louder. He called this stupid and said my friends were manipulating me. He accused Brooke of turning me against him. Brooke told him to leave, that it wasn't working. Mason mumbled something else I couldn't hear. Then, a powerful kick-like thud. Brooke locked the door and walked back to the couch. He had allegedly marked her door frame with a kick. We heard his footsteps slow as he left. Thursday afternoon, I visited the landlord in her first-floor office. A woman in her early 60s, wearing reading glasses on a chain, checked my lease on her computer. "What happened?" she asked after seeing my name. I told her my fiancé and I had broken up, and one of us had to leave. She nodded, as if she'd heard this story 100 times. My lease still had 5 months left, she apologized. Both Mason and I were legally responsible for the rent until then. She suggested finding someone to take over my 60% of the lease if we wanted to leave early. New tenants needed her approval, but she'd work with us. I thanked her and went upstairs with a new purpose, a task to focus on instead of feeling stuck between my old and new lives. Monday morning, I tried to act normal at work. Grant, from my department, brought me coffee at 9:30 a.m. and asked about lunch. It seemed odd, so I said yes. We sat by the window at a sandwich shop 3 blocks from the office. Grant asked about wedding preparations, and I felt sick. He and Mason and I had all seen each other at the December corporate Christmas party. Mason had kept me glued to his side all night, announcing our marriage to everyone. A bite of my sandwich bought me a moment to pause. I told Grant that wedding stress was manageable. Even I thought my voice sounded fake. Grant just nodded, mentioning a project due next week. I liked that he didn't demand more information. Walking back to work, I realized how many coworkers knew Mason and would have questions I just couldn't answer. My phone buzzed during a Wednesday afternoon meeting. A text from Mason. His mother, he said, wanted to discuss this misunderstanding. He suggested she could help refocus us. I stared at the message until someone asked about the quarterly report, then pretended to listen, rereading the text in the bathroom after the meeting. I knew who had advised the weight loss. This wasn't Mason's original plan. His mother had been disgusted with my body for months. Before I could reconsider, I blocked her number. I didn't need her explanations or her manipulation. Mason texted 4 more times, asking why I wasn't answering his mother. I focused on work, my phone face down on my desk. The wedding planner contacted me Wednesday morning. Her tone was confident as she asked about final guest counts. I closed my office door before telling her we were canceling. The joy drained from her voice. This happened, she admitted, but she understood. We would lose most of our deposits, she explained. We were past the 75-day mark for a full refund from the venue. The caterer would keep over half. The band kept their deposit. Only the photographer would refund us, minus a processing fee. While she spoke, I quickly calculated in my head. More than $9,500 was lost. Cancel everything, I begged her. She apologized and emailed the documents. After hanging up, I sat at my desk, sick about the money, but knowing it was worth it. The $9,500 cost to end a conditional acceptance marriage seemed entirely fair. Thursday night, Brooke suggested I see a professional. Friends were fine, she said, but I needed real help processing. She had already scheduled sessions with Claire Bennett, a therapist who accepted my insurance, for the following week. I booked the appointment while Brooke was still on the phone, to avoid convincing myself otherwise. The first session started at 3:30 the next Wednesday. Claire's downtown office had a lavender-scented waiting room. She was younger than I expected, with kind, brown hair. She asked me about my ideal marriage. I mentioned our wedding, a house, potential children. Claire listened, uninterrupted. Then she asked how Mason would affect my daily life. As I spoke, I realized I'd imagined a future trying to meet changing standards, always feeling insecure. My marriage would have been spent worrying about my weight, my beauty, my worth. Claire wrote something in her notepad and asked how I felt. I felt a wave of regret, almost choosing that life. Friday afternoon, I got a voicemail. Mason texted me his mother's number. In the work parking lot, I listened in my car. Her voice was vehement. She called me selfish and immature for rejecting a good man over advice. He deserved better, she said, than someone who couldn't take criticism. She declared I had erred greatly. She sounded almost sweet when discussing my relationship comfort. She warned Mason months ago that I'd let myself go after the wedding if I wasn't careful. She said she was just preventing it. The message lasted 2.5 minutes. It took 2 listens to truly grasp how someone could think this way. Mason had asked me to lose 28 pounds only after months of her criticizing me, calling me comfortable, and predicting I'd gain weight. I deleted the message, pure anger surging through me. I told Brooke about the voicemail over coffee Saturday morning. Her anger was palpable. She said things about Mason's mother that made me laugh for days. She also disclosed what a mutual friend had told her. Mason was claiming I had left him without warning over a minor wedding planning dispute. His version made me sound unstable. He was pretending to be the surprised victim. My face heated up. Brooke asked me if I wanted to set the record straight. I agreed immediately. But then, I thought about it more. Claire had suggested I focus on my healing rather than managing others' stories. I decided to avoid engaging in Mason's arguments. Brooke thought that was smart, but she said she'd tell anyone who asked that Mason was lying. Sunday afternoon, Brooke called with good news. Her boyfriend knew a renter. He needed a place, and he was interested in taking over my half of the lease 6 weeks later. I called the landlord. She mentioned checking the new tenant's credit, but it sounded promising. I texted Mason that I'd found a tenant for my half of the lease. The call started immediately, loud and furious. He said I was leaving home. He said I abandoned us. He said I wasn't trying to bargain. I patiently waited for his silence. You left us, Mason, I told him, when you made my dress size a condition of your love. Not fair, he said. Fair, I replied, and hung up. My hands were shaking, but I felt a powerful sense of satisfaction from defending myself. Monday night, I couldn't sleep. I looked through old photos on my laptop. Mason and I dating, 5 years ago. The work conference where we met. Our 4th date at a baseball game. A beach weekend 7 months later. I looked the same. Same face, same body, same size. I hadn't gained weight. That made his request not just insulting, but manipulative. He wasn't reacting to a change. He was preemptively controlling me to prevent me from falling short of his standards. He may have always had these thoughts, just waiting until we were engaged to voice them. Regardless, it proved my choice was right. I closed my laptop and finally slept. Mason texted Wednesday to meet for coffee to divide our things. We arranged to meet Thursday afternoon at a coffee shop near my office. He was sitting at a back table when I arrived. He started to stand, to hug me, but I sat down quickly. He sat too, and immediately started talking. He said he didn't mean it that way. He said he was just nervous about the photos, because weddings were expensive, and he wanted perfection. We'd paid $3,400 for the photographer, so he wanted good photos. He never meant to hurt me, he said. He said I overreacted. He spoke nonstop for 20 minutes. I just gazed at him silently. He paused, then asked if I was going to respond. Mason, I said, my voice steady. Asking your partner to lose weight for photos isn't nervousness. It's malice disguised as concern. I told him that his inability to comprehend that disqualified him from marrying me. His face reddened. Other customers looked over as his voice grew louder. He wondered why I was punishing him for caring about our wedding. He said he just wanted to make us special. I was being unreasonable and stubborn, he accused. I got up while he was still talking. I walked out of the coffee shop, got in my car, and drove away. He sent texts, but I didn't read them. I was done arguing with someone who simply didn't understand. Monday morning, an email arrived in my work inbox from the conference organizer. The annual professional development conference was 6 weeks away. Mason's name appeared 4 rows below mine on the attendee list. My stomach twisted. I had signed up for this conference 8 months ago, when we were still together, planning our future. My first thought was to cancel my registration. The idea of staying in the same hotel for 4 days filled me with dread. I started a new email to request reassignment, but stopped halfway through. Mason had taken 5 years of my life and shaped every decision. He would not steal my career opportunities. I deleted that message and wrote another. Mason and I worked in related departments. I explained to the organizer, and for the benefit of our company, I asked if we could be in different workshop tracks. Within an hour, the organizer replied, promising to minimize overlap. I felt a wave of relief and a surge of pride that I had stood up for myself instead of hiding. I saw Claire that afternoon for therapy. When she asked how I was handling the separation, I explained the conference situation. Then I mentioned my lingering concern. My thoughts kept returning to the wedding planning, to how Mason had made every single decision. Claire asked me what I had chosen for the wedding. I sat there, genuinely trying to remember. The architecture drew him to the venue. The caterer was his choice because he wanted a specific menu. He chose the band after hearing them at his cousin's wedding. He chose navy and gold because they were his college colors. His family and co-workers dominated the guest list. Even when I chose my dress, his mother advised me on what would photograph well. Claire asked about my wedding wishes. I realized I was completely clueless. I had never considered it because Mason was so excited about everything that I just followed his plans. Claire noted the pattern. Mason made decisions for us without actually consulting me, she observed, and I accepted it because I thought that was what compromise looked like. But compromising, she explained, meant both parties contributed. Mason decided, and I agreed, because disagreeing felt difficult. I left therapy feeling like someone had turned on a light in a room I'd been sitting in for 5 years. I could finally see all the furniture I'd been tripping over in the dark. Harper called that night to say she'd found a micro one-bedroom apartment available immediately. The kitchen was a hot plate and a mini fridge, and the bathroom was so small you could sit on the toilet and wash your hands in the sink. The rent was $250 more than my half of the current apartment, but it was available now, and it was mine alone. So, I told Harper I would take it. She picked me up Saturday morning with her truck, and we loaded my clothes, my books, my kitchen supplies, and the small desk I'd brought into the relationship. The building didn't have an elevator, so Harper helped me carry everything up 4 flights of stairs. We spent the afternoon setting up my new space. I put my bed against the wall, my desk under the window, and hung my clothes in the barely sized closet. Harper and I went to HomeGoods to buy curtains. I stood in the curtain aisle, looking at beige, gray, white, and navy options. Then I saw them. bright yellow curtains with a sunshine pattern that Mason would have hated and his mother would have called too loud. I bought them immediately. Harper helped me hang them, and the whole apartment looked different, brighter, happier. Mine. I looked around at this small, expensive space that I had chosen without considering anyone else's opinion and felt free for the first time in years. Sunday afternoon, I was reading labels in the pasta aisle at the grocery store near my new apartment when I heard my name called. Nolan, Mason's best man, stopped his cart next to mine and asked how I was doing. I said I was fine and tried to move past him, but he stepped in front of me. Mason, he said, was really torn up about the breakup, not eating or sleeping, and spending most of his time looking miserable. He suggested I give Mason another chance because everyone makes mistakes, and Mason loved me. I looked at Nolan, wondering what Mason had told him about why we broke up. Nolan looked uncomfortable and mumbled something about wedding planning disagreements. I told Nolan that Mason had demanded I lose 28 pounds so I wouldn't look heavy in our wedding photos. He said he didn't know that. I told him Mason should be torn up about what he said to me, not about facing consequences. Nolan was quiet for a moment. Then he said he was sorry. He didn't realize that. He said he would have reacted the same way I did if someone told him to lose weight for photos. I appreciated his honesty. I told him I needed to finish shopping, and he moved his cart out of my way. I met Brooke for coffee Wednesday morning before work. She looked at me with an unreadable expression and said she'd heard something from another friend and wanted to tell me. No one in their friend group knew why Mason's previous girlfriend left him. She just stopped showing up to events, and Mason said they grew apart. Brooke always thought it was weird how quickly that relationship ended. So, she wondered if Mason had done something similar. Later, I searched through Mason's old photos and found Lauren, his ex, on social media. She lived 3 towns over. I looked at her profile for a long time, debating whether to contact her. It felt strange to reach out to someone I didn't know to ask about her relationship history, but I needed to know if Mason had a pattern of this behavior or if I was special in bringing it out of him. I introduced myself, explained I was engaged to Mason until recently, and asked if she would be willing to talk about their relationship. I hit send before I could change my mind. Lauren responded the next day. We agreed to have lunch Saturday at a restaurant halfway between our towns. I arrived first and sat at a window table. Lauren arrived 12 minutes later, and I recognized her from her photos. She sat across from me, and we ordered food. Then she asked, "So, what happened with Mason?" I told her about the weight loss demand, his mother's involvement, and how he'd laughed when I asked if he planned to lose weight. Lauren nodded, like none of this surprised her. She said Mason behaved similarly with her. At first, he was wonderful and supportive. Then, he started making comments. He said her job wasn't prestigious enough, and she should look for something else. He said her friends were holding her back. He criticized how much time she spent with her family. Then he commented on her appearance, saying she should wear more makeup, dress more casually, and lose a few pounds, and tone up. He always wanted her to be the best version of herself. Lauren said she tried for 7 months to change her hair, buy new clothes, and join a gym, but he always found something else to improve. She left when she realized the point wasn't improvement. The point was control. I drove home from lunch with Lauren feeling both validated and profoundly sad. Her story proved I wasn't crazy or oversensitive. Mason had done this before, criticizing women and passing it off as care. I felt sad that I had wasted 5 years on someone whose behavior was so predictable. If I had known about Lauren earlier, maybe I would have seen the signs sooner and left before we got engaged, planned a wedding, and built a life together that I now had to take apart. I called Sienna from my car and told her about Lauren. She listened, then changed my perspective. Recognizing the pattern now saved you from wasting more years, she said. Some people stay in relationships like this for decades because they never get confirmation that the problem is real. You have proof that leaving was the right choice, which is worth celebrating, even though it hurts. A month later, I checked into the hotel for the conference. My stomach dropped. Mason was across the lobby, talking to an accountant. Even though I knew he'd be there, seeing him made it too real. I headed for the elevator to avoid him. But Grant, who worked in my department, asked if I wanted coffee before the first session. I agreed. Being with someone was better than being alone. Grant ordered 2 lattes at the hotel coffee shop and didn't mention Mason or ask about my personal life. He just talked about work projects and conference sessions. His casual kindness made me feel less alone. I realized I had been so focused on Mason, the wedding, and the breakup that I forgot I had other people who cared about me. The first day of sessions went well. The organizer had kept her promise to separate Mason and me. I didn't see him again until the networking break Friday afternoon. I saw him walking toward me. Then Grant blocked his path before he could reach me. I watched Mason explain a work project to Grant, who was his colleague, and I felt a wave of gratitude. Grant kept Mason busy for 15 minutes talking about budget reports and timeline adjustments. After their conversation, I moved to another part of the room and found Grant near the refreshment table. I thanked him, and he just shrugged, saying, "Everyone deserves colleagues who have their back." I realized I had more support than I thought. After the conference, Sunday night, I checked my mail and found a travel company envelope. A payment notice for Mason's honeymoon package, scheduled for 10 weeks from now. I had been so focused on what I lost when I left Mason that I didn't even realize what I still had. The package was non-refundable, and the entire $6,800 cost was due in 45 days. I called Mason immediately. He answered on the third ring. I asked him why he never canceled the honeymoon. He said he forgot about it with everything else going on. I told him he needed to handle this. Mason said we should both pay half since we both benefited from booking it originally. I told him I wasn't paying for a honeymoon that wouldn't happen because of his behavior. He said I was being unreasonable. I hung up and called the travel company. The representative said Mason was the only one who could make changes or cancellations. She said they would send the account to collections if payment wasn't received by the due date. I texted Mason the deadline and told him to handle it, but he didn't respond. I scheduled a lawyer appointment the next week to fix Mason's financial mess. My lawyer, a woman in her early 60s, listened as I explained the honeymoon, the wedding deposits, and the security deposit from our old apartment that Mason still owed me half of. She looked at our old lease, the honeymoon booking email trail, and screenshots of Mason's texts claiming I owed him for wedding cancellations. She spent 20 minutes before looking up. She suggested writing a clear division of debts to offset what Mason claimed I owed against what he actually owed me. The security deposit was $1,350, and Mason never paid me back his half when we moved. That covered most of what he said I owed for the venue deposit. She typed a document right there, listing every shared expense and who was responsible. Following her work, Mason owed me $450 more than I owed him, as the wedding venue was split evenly since we both signed that contract. The other deposits were divided similarly by who signed what paperwork. I paid her fee and left with copies of everything in a folder. Claire noticed something in my communication about wedding planning. In our next therapy session, she asked me what I wanted for the wedding, and I still couldn't think of a single detail. She also asked if I was grateful that Mason wanted to marry me. Sienna had asked what I meant by someone like him. I said Mason was confident, funny, and successful, and I sometimes wondered why he picked me. Claire pointed out that I was also confident, funny, and successful. She asked how it felt different. I realized I had been performing gratitude for being chosen. Mason made me feel like I should be thankful someone wanted to marry me, so I didn't advocate for what I wanted, for fear of appearing difficult or ungrateful. Claire asked if I deserved wedding opinions. I replied, of course. Hearing myself say it made me realize I hadn't acted like I believed it. She said this pattern probably appeared in other areas of our relationship. I thought about all the times I agreed to things I didn't want or stayed quiet when Mason made decisions without asking. The wedding was just the biggest example of how I shrank to please him. That week, I ran 5 and 6 miles because 4 felt easy, and I signed up for unlimited monthly classes at an advanced yoga studio across town. The classes were harder than I was used to, and I loved shaking my muscles, breathing hard, and knowing I was getting stronger. Every mile I ran felt like I was shaking off Mason's shame. He wanted me to change my body to meet his standards, but now I was changing my body for myself. I told the yoga instructor I was training to feel like myself again, and she smiled like she understood. After class, I saw someone taking up space without apologizing in the mirror. I didn't tell many people why Mason and I broke up, but Brooke told her boyfriend, who told someone else, and the story spread. Her mutual friends stopped responding to my texts and unfollowed me on social media. I assumed they were siding with Mason, didn't believe me, or thought I was overreacting. Others, though, said they always thought his treatment was off. A book club member wrote a long message saying she was glad I got away from Mason because he often spoke over me in groups. A gym friend said Mason made comments about other women's bodies when I wasn't around, which always made him uncomfortable. 3 weeks later, I met 4 college friends for coffee downtown. I trusted them to be honest, so we ordered drinks and sat at a corner table. I asked if Mason had ever said anything weird about my appearance. My first friend hesitated. Mason made jokes about your appearance, she admitted, saying you should try a new hairstyle, or asking if you were really going to eat dessert, or mentioning that certain colors weren't flattering on you. She said they all laughed uncomfortably at the time because they didn't know what else to do. Another friend said Mason once commented that I was lucky to have him because most guys his age wanted someone younger and thinner. She almost said something, but was afraid of causing a scene. The third friend said she had considered pulling me aside several times, but didn't know how to bring it up without sounding interfering. I sat there, realizing the red flags were obvious to others, even though I had tried to hide them from myself. They apologized for not saying anything sooner. Mason wrote me a long email 4 days after that coffee meeting, with the subject line, "We need to talk." He listed everything he thought he did right in our relationship and how I was throwing it away over one mistake. He listed all the nice things he'd done for me over 5 years. He remembered driving 7 hours to pick me up when my car broke down, the surprise birthday party he threw for me 3 years ago, every gift he bought, every vacation we took, and every time he supported me through something difficult. He said he made one comment about wanting me to look my best for our wedding, and I was using it to destroy everything we built together. He said I was unfair, unreasonable, and selfish, and that if I loved him, I would forgive this one mistake and return to him. I read the email 3 times. I wrote a response explaining why his request was a symptom of how he saw me. Deleted it. Wrote a different response about our relationship's cycle of control. Deleted that. I wrote a third version with 2 sentences saying I was not coming back and he needed to respect my decision. I was about to send it when I called Claire. She asked me to read her the email. She was quiet, then said his email was manipulation, designed to make me doubt my decision. He was rewriting history to make himself the victim, she explained, and that silence was the clearest boundary I could set. I thanked her and deleted all 3 drafts without sending them. 9 days later, a letter arrived at my new apartment. The handwriting on the envelope was unfamiliar, but inside were 3 pages of stationery with flowers. Marlene, Mason's mother. She wrote that I was breaking her son's heart and ruining his life, saying Mason was a good man who deserved a wife who appreciated him. Women, she declared, should be grateful for male attention and willing to maintain themselves to keep it. She said her generation understood that marriage required compromise and sacrifice, but my generation was too selfish to make relationships work. She said I would regret this decision when I was older and alone and realized I had wasted my chance at a family. She said Mason told her I refused to discuss his concerns about the wedding photos, proving I did not love him. I read 2 pages before stopping. It revealed more about her values than anything else. I didn't care what she thought of me, my choices, or my generation. I threw the letter away without finishing it. The following month, a work friend got married, and I almost didn't go. I was afraid it would hurt to watch someone else get married when my own wedding was supposed to be in 10 weeks. But I had already RSVP'd yes and bought a gift. So, I put on a dress and drove to the garden ceremony. The bride looked radiant and happy, and her groom looked at her like she was pure perfection. He cried when she walked down the aisle. During the vows, he said he loved every part of her and couldn't wait to spend his life making her as happy as she made him. I was so glad not to be marrying Mason, and incredibly confident I'd made the right choice. At the reception, I danced with other guests, ate cake, and celebrated love that looked like love should. I felt fine driving home that night. Grant invited me to lunch the next week. We talked outside at a sandwich shop near the office, despite the cold. He started talking about his ex, who constantly criticized him, telling him to dress better, work out more, and be more social. After that relationship, he said, it took him 3 years to rebuild his confidence, and he still sometimes heard her voice telling him he wasn't good enough. Sharing our experiences made me feel less alone. Grant said the hardest part was realizing how much he had changed to please her. I assured him I understood that feeling. As we finished our sandwiches and returned to work, I was just glad to know someone else understood. 7 months after the breakup, Mason arrived at my apartment building as I returned from a run. He said he had been in therapy and understood what he did wrong. His therapist, he claimed, helped him see how his weight comments were harmful and controlling. He asked if we could try again, promising he had changed and would never make me feel that way again. A part of me craved the familiarity, the apology. I wanted to believe people could change. I missed our good times, and I was tired of being alone. But then I looked at him, standing there, and remembered everything. How he laughed when I asked if he would lose weight. His mother's letter about maintaining myself. 5 years of shrinking to fit what he wanted. I told Mason I appreciated that he was working on himself, but I wasn't interested in getting back together. He looked at me like I spoke a different language. He said I was unfair by not giving him a chance to prove he was different. His voice got louder. He said he went to therapy for me, and I owed him a chance. His anger, barely concealed, showed he hadn't changed at all. Mason tried to hug me goodbye, but I stepped back. The hurt on his face almost made me feel guilty, but then I remembered I wasn't responsible for his emotions anymore. He left without a word. I closed the door and sank to the floor, my hands and body shaking, but my mind was clear. I texted Claire. I held my boundary, and it felt terrible and right at the same time. She replied with a proud face emoji. That's growth, she wrote. 7 months after the breakup, the lawyer completed the final paperwork to divide our shared assets. He spread the documents across his desk and showed me where to sign. Everything was itemized and fair. The savings account was split in half. The furniture we bought together was divided by who kept what. The security deposit from our old apartment calculated and allocated. I signed my name on every page, feeling like I was closing a door. I left that office financially independent from Mason. I had less money than if we had stayed together. Our combined incomes had made life easier. But I had more peace than I'd had in years. The trade was worth it. I drove home and transferred half of the savings into my personal account. Seeing that number in my balance made me feel like I was truly building my own life. A month later, my manager called me into her office and told me the directors liked my conference work. I took the new job immediately. The raise was big enough to buy a better apartment or start saving for things I really wanted. That night, Brooke and Harper and I celebrated at our favorite restaurant with appetizers, dessert, and wine. Brooke kept saying she knew I would get it. Harper raised her glass and said she was proud of me. Grant stopped by my desk the next morning to congratulate me and said he had told management about my conference work. Several directors had asked him about me. I thanked him for believing in me and realized I was building a professional reputation completely unrelated to any relationship. My career and my success were mine, and nobody could take them away. I booked a solo vacation with some of the wedding money. Mason always wanted to go places together, and his idea of vacation involved tours, schedules, and restaurant reservations made weeks in advance. I booked a cabin near Rocky Mountain National Park with no plan, except to do what felt right each day. The first morning, I made coffee and sat on the porch, watching the sun rise over the mountains. Nobody asked me what I wanted to do or suggested activities. I hiked a trail I found on a map at the visitor center for 5 hours, stopping whenever I wanted to take photos or just breathe. Every decision was mine: where I ate breakfast, how I spent my afternoons, when I went to bed. Hiking different trails each day, reading 4 books, eating at restaurants without worrying about others' preferences. It felt like finally breathing fully after years of holding my breath. I returned from vacation feeling lighter, more myself. I realized I hadn't checked Mason's social media in over 9 days. I sat by a fire outside my cabin on the last night and felt settled, like I hadn't in 5 years. I opened the app out of curiosity and saw he hadn't looked at my profile in weeks. His mental space had shrunk to almost nothing as I filled mine with my own hobbies, friendships, and career goals. I joined a downtown coffee shop book club and took a pottery class on Tuesday nights. I planned outings with coworkers and built a life that reflected who I was, instead of who others wanted me to be. Claire and I discussed ending therapy at our next session because she said I was doing so much better, and I could see it, too. I had left Mason 7 months ago and wondered if I made the right choice. Now I knew I did. Claire said I had learned to set boundaries and trust my instincts, which would help me in every relationship. I still wanted to see her, just less often, so we agreed on monthly sessions instead of weekly. In early spring, I started casually dating again. Just coffee dates and park walks. I noticed changes in my behavior immediately. I stated my preferences clearly. I ended dates early without apologizing or explaining when something felt off. I went on a date with a man who spent the whole time talking about his ex-girlfriend. Harper called me one Saturday morning and asked if we could meet for breakfast. I finished my coffee with the man and told him I didn't think we were a good match. He seemed surprised, but I trusted my instincts. We had good omelets at a place near her apartment. She told me she was proud of how I handled everything with Mason, and that watching me leave a bad situation gave her the courage to set better boundaries in her own life. Her boss had been taking advantage of her for months, asking her to work late without extra pay, answering emails on weekends, and making her feel guilty when she said no. Harper told him she would no longer be available outside her scheduled hours. Her boss was upset, but he accepted it. She said seeing me choose myself helped her realize she could do the same. That said something. 10 months after the breakup, I ran a half marathon. 14 weeks of training, for weekday runs, 2 longer Sunday runs. I pushed myself each week, getting stronger and clearer. Race day was cold and sunny, hundreds of runners lining up. The gun went off, and we started moving. The first few miles felt easy. My legs were fresh, my breathing steady. Around mile 8, my legs started to hurt, but I kept going. Mile 11 was hard. My body wanted to stop, but I told myself I could do 2 more miles. I finished at 13.5 miles, and someone put a medal around my neck. My legs were shaking. My lungs were burning. I felt amazing. Crossing that finish line showed how far I had come. I carried myself 13.5 miles on strength I built for myself, not to impress others or look good in photos. I was incredibly proud of what I had accomplished. 3 weeks after the half marathon, Grant invited me to a barbecue at his apartment building. He said some friends were getting together and I should come meet them. I brought a bottle of wine and was nervous walking up to his apartment. Grant opened the door and introduced me to 7 people sitting around his living room. They were warm immediately and asked about my running, my job, my hobbies. Nobody commented on how I looked or what I ate. When we went to the patio for burgers, one woman mentioned training for a triathlon and asked if I wanted to join her running group. While eating potato salad and drinking beer, a guy told stories about his terrible dating experiences that made everyone laugh. I realized this was what normal felt like. People who didn't think bodies were topics for public discussion and who cared about what you did and thought instead of how you looked. I went home that night feeling so much lighter. A month later, Lauren texted me to see how I was doing. I stared at her name on my phone for a minute before responding. We agreed to meet for coffee on Saturday morning. I arrived early and ordered a latte. Lauren arrived looking healthy and happy. We hugged and sat down, and she asked about my life since the breakup. I told her about therapy, the promotion, and the half marathon. She nodded and said she was proud of me for leaving. She told me about her 7 months of therapy after Mason. She had joined a book club and started painting again. She learned to recognize red flags early. Then she met someone new, someone who never suggested she change anything about herself and loved her exactly as she was. She showed me photos of her engagement ring. Her face lit up when she talked about her partner. In early summer, I moved into a larger 1-bedroom apartment. The promotion salary allowed me to afford more space and a better neighborhood. I spent 14 days decorating it the way I wanted, including buying a bright blue couch because I just loved the color. I chose furniture to create a reading nook by the window and hung art that made me smile, without worrying if guests would like it. The apartment was mine alone, so I didn't have to worry about Mason or his mother's opinions. I was proud of my yellow curtains and my blue couch. 11 months after the breakup, I came home from work. Mason sent a text saying he was dating someone new. My stomach dropped. I read it twice and felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a mild sense of closure. I typed a polite response, wishing him well and preferring to keep our interactions professional. I deleted his number from my phone. We were done. I was building something new. Brooke's birthday party was on a warm June Saturday. She rented a rooftop downtown and invited 45 people. I wore a dress I bought because I loved it. Grant was talking to Harper, and some of my running group stood by the bar. I grabbed a drink, joined conversations, laughed at jokes, and made plans for dinner next week. Halfway through the party, a realization hit me. I was happy with my life. Not just okay or healing, but truly happy with what I was building. Brooke asked what was so funny because I was smiling so much. I told her I was just happy. She hugged me and said she could tell. Claire asked me what I learned from this experience at our last regular session in July. I thought about it for a minute. I learned that love should not require me to change my body or my voice. I told her, the right person will celebrate who I am instead of criticizing who I am not. I learned that I am worth that kind of love, to trust my instincts when something feels wrong, and that leaving a bad situation takes courage, but staying in one takes even more. Claire smiled and said I had done important work. She said I could call her if I needed support, but she thought I could handle whatever came next. I left her office feeling ready. I scrolled through my phone's photos of Mason and me at restaurants, parks, and parties from August. I expected to feel sad, but instead, I felt grateful. Grateful I discovered his conditional love before we got married. Grateful I had the courage to leave when I saw who he was. Grateful for the 14 months of growth that taught me to value myself. Those 5 years weren't wasted. They taught me what I didn't want and the difference between someone who loves you and someone who loves controlling you. I closed the photo app and deleted the entire album. At a September dinner party, my running group friend invited me to her house for food and games. When I arrived, I saw a stranger helping in the kitchen. My friend introduced us, and he asked about my running, seeming genuinely interested in my half-marathon training. He talked about his job, his family, and his plans to hike the Appalachian Trail for 2 hours, without once mentioning my appearance. It felt easy. It felt equal. I had forgotten that was even possible. After the party, he asked for my number. I gave it to him, curious about the outcome. 4 days later, he texted me, asking me to dinner. I stared at the message, excited and nervous, but not afraid. I knew red flags now, and I trusted myself to walk away. That self-trust was the best thing I got from leaving Mason. I said yes and suggested a restaurant. We made plans for Friday night. I put my phone down and smiled. This felt different. This felt right. 14 months after taking off my engagement ring, I was training for a full marathon. I ran 4 times a week and did strength training 3 times a week. My body was strong, and my mind was clear. I booked a trip to Iceland in October to see the northern lights and hike through lava fields. Work was going well. I got another small promotion and more responsibility. I was building a life where I took up space without apologizing, and where my worth wasn't tied to how I looked in others' photos. I remembered the night Mason asked me to lose weight, and how small he tried to make me feel. I remembered taking off that ring and choosing myself. I was prouder than ever of who I was becoming.